Unit 3, Part 1, the immune system. Do now. We talked this through in class. What does it mean to be immune to something? Being immune to something means you're resistant to it, you can't get sick from it, or it won't affect you. You can have your own answers on this. These are just from when we talked it through in class. What are 3 ways to prevent catching a cold? Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands, don't share drinks, and sleep is really important. The more sleep you have, the better your body can fight things off, which we'll talk about in a moment. For Part 3, you were writing a few notes about what you already know about the immune system, what it means, how it works, etc. Anything that you know just from past science classes or reading the news lately. There's been a lot about antibodies. We knew that the immune system protects us from certain things, and right there I wrote, sleep is magical, because sleep is one of the most important things you can do. If you've had a good night of sleep, your body has the energy to fight off pathogens, which we're about to learn about, things that make you sick, much better than if you haven't had a good night of sleep. Think about how you feel after you haven't had a good night of sleep. Your cells feel the same way. This is a GIF on your slide that says pocket sand, and that's on there because the person in the GIF is defending himself against somebody who's approaching. The immune system is the body's defense mechanism against foreign objects and organisms that can cause disease and cause internal cells to malfunction. At the bottom, we talked about how diseases are linked to homeostasis. So remember, homeostasis is the maintenance of your internal stability, so the balance and the levels that your body keeps to keep you healthy. Diseases mess up homeostasis when you're sick. For example, your temperature can fluctuate, meaning you can get a fever or feel like you have the chills, because your body is busy fighting the foreign invader, so it's not spending its energy keeping you in your normal levels of balance. Infectious diseases versus non-infectious diseases. Infectious diseases are called communicable, meaning they're diseases that are caused by a microorganism or a virus that can be transmitted from one organism to another. So these are the things you can catch. These are contagious. Some common examples we listed in class are COVID-19, flu, Ebola, smallpox, the cold, etc. Non-infectious diseases are things that you cannot pass from one organism to another. These are things like genetic disorders or environmental conditions. These are not contagious. Examples are cancer, heart disease, polio once you've gotten it from a pathogen, diabetes, etc. Infectious diseases are caused by pathogens. A pathogen is a microorganism, typically a tiny living thing, but viruses are an exception to that rule, or a foreign invader that disrupts homeostasis and can cause disease. The average human has over 100 trillion microorganisms in and around your body, both good and bad. These are in places like your mouth, your digestive system, and on the surface of your skin. You only have about 37 trillion human cells, so there are about 3 times as many non-you microorganisms that you coexist with on a daily basis. If they're harmful and they live on your body, we're immune to them. If they are beneficial, they're there for a reason, which we'll talk about soon. There are 4 major types of pathogens that cause disease. There are parasites. Examples include tapeworm, pinworm, malaria. There are viruses, such as COVID-19, the cold, flu. There are bacterial infections like Lyme disease, flesh-eating bacteria, E. coli, salmonella, and strep. And there are fungal infections like ringworm or athlete's foot is a big one. Mold is a type of fungus. It doesn't always get you sick. Sometimes that's just an allergy. We tried this chart on our own in class, but here is an answer key if you have any blank boxes. So the 4 types of pathogens are in the column on the left: bacteria, virus, parasite, and fungus. Then we did a description, an example of each type of disease, and decided whether it was prokaryotic, eukaryotic, or neither. For bacteria are single-celled organisms with no organelles. They're very simple, small organisms. They typically grow in colonies. An example of bacteria or a bacterial infection is salmonella or E. coli or strep. Bacteria are prokaryotes, meaning they have no internal structure, no nucleus, single-celled. Next, we have virus. Viruses are non-living because they have no cells. So according to cell theory, to be considered alive, you must have cells. Since viruses don't have cells, they can't be considered alive. Common examples of viruses that you have heard of are flu, cold, Ebola, COVID, and more. Viruses are not living, so they cannot be categorized into types of cells, so they are neither prokaryotic nor eukaryotic. Parasites. Parasites need a host to feed on. There are certain organisms that act like parasites that are not considered pathogens. For example, lice acts like a parasite in that it needs a place to live and it feeds on you, but it doesn't actually pass you a disease. Lice itself is more of a nuisance than an actual disease. Malaria and tapeworm are examples of parasites that cause diseases. And parasites are eukaryotic, meaning they can be one or multiple cells, but they have internal structure like organelles, like a nucleus. Last, we have fungi, or fungus is the single of fungi. Decomposers, which feed on decaying things. Common examples are athlete's foot, ringworm, and yeast infections. And these are eukaryotic as well, meaning they are single or multicellular complex organisms. Now we know about all the types of things that can make us sick, but what about our ways of defending ourselves? Our bodies have 3 lines of defense against pathogens or things that can cause harm. The first line of defense is non-specific, meaning these will try to target anything that's coming into your body that shouldn't be there. The first line of defense includes 3 different types of barriers: mechanical and physical barriers, chemical barriers, and the biological barrier. The second line of defense is also nonspecific. This is called the inflammatory response, and it's about swelling and a cellular process called phagocytosis. This will try to target anything that has broken past the first line but is not harmful enough to require the third line. The third line of defense is a specific response. This is often called your adaptive resistance because your body adapts to certain things throughout your lifetime. The immune response is composed of a variety of white blood cells and antibodies that all have very specific jobs to target specific pathogens that you've encountered. On your slides, this is a GIF that's pretty fun to watch, if I do say so myself. The first line of defense, a variety of barriers to keep most pathogens out of the body. Defenses in the first line are the same regardless of the type of pathogen, meaning if it's a parasite, a fungus, or even a splinter, they're all going to respond the same way. They don't target specific pathogens, so they're called non-specific defenses. And down below, we put a definition of what it means to be non-specific: general. So for the tent example, and the GIF shows it better than this picture, the tent is blocking all of the kids from getting out of the door. It's not specifically targeting any single child. Part of the first line of defense is the physical or mechanical barriers. Physical protections like your skin, eyelashes, eyebrows, hair, and nose hair are all ways of making sure pathogens don't get into things like your eyes, your nose, your mouth. If you go past your nose hairs up farther, you have something called cilia, which are tiny hair-like structures inside your nose that trap and sweep pathogens. In class, we learned about the cilia dance. Cilia wave around like this and try to block and sweep out any pathogens that might get in. Those are designed to block out anything that might have gotten past the nose hair that you've inhaled so that it doesn't get into your system. Every opening from the outside of your body to the inside, like your mouth, your nose, and even your genitals, contains something called a mucous membrane. Mucous membranes are tissues that line internal space and secrete mucus for protection. These are in your mouth, nose, esophagus, intestines, and more. The next part of your first line of defense is called the chemical barrier. These barriers are chemicals that are produced by the body designed to kill pathogens. So in your GIF, you can see that with the water socks, the water is rolling right off of the sock. None of it's getting in. The traditional socks, it's soaking in. We have some body chemicals that help us do similar things. So instead of letting a pathogen in, things will just roll right off the surface. We have tears in our eyes that can either physically wash out a pathogen or chemically break it down. This also is true for dust. So if you are walking into the wind and something goes in your eye and your eyes start tearing up, that's usually because it's trying to get a piece of dust or some small particle out of your eye. We have earwax that creates a barrier that can block anything from coming in that shouldn't come into your ears. We have stomach acid to break down pathogens that may come in on our food. We have sweat to help wash away and break down pathogens that are on our skin or near our glands. Mucus can help trap pathogens and also can help flush it out of our system. And then many of these chemicals contain something called an enzyme. Enzymes are proteins that break things down through chemical reactions so they can physically destroy any of the pathogens that have encountered these chemicals in our bodies. The third part of our first line of defense is called the biological barrier. These are our good bacteria, quote unquote. These are normal body flora, meaning the bacteria that happen to live in your body that prevent bad bacteria from entering. These live on your skin, in your mouth, in your intestines, and they're designed to do certain jobs that we are not capable of doing. So some of the bacteria, for example, in our digestive system can break down molecules that we cannot digest. This is beneficial for both of us being you and the bacteria. The bacteria get a warm, cozy place to live with a great food source. We get the job of something breaking down some foods that we've eaten if we're not able to do it ourselves, so we get nutrients and they get a place to live. Pretty good deal to me. Another way bacteria can help crowd out pathogens is if they're taking up the space and the resources, let's say, in your intestines, there won't be enough space or resources for the bad bacteria to come in and infect you. If you take antibiotics, that can wipe out your good bacteria, which is why drinking kombucha or eating yogurt after taking antibiotics is recommended, because those are both considered probiotics. They contain lots of good bacteria to help replenish your natural body biological barrier. Next, we have the second line of defense, or the inflammatory response. When pathogens break through the body's first line of defense, the body responds with a second line of defense. This is called the inflammatory response. What is inflammation? We answered this in class. It's swelling. There are 4 key signs of inflammation. The area usually becomes red, warm, swollen, and painful. Inflammation is one way the body reacts to infections or injuries. When tissue is damaged, a chemical called histamine, which is a type of hormone, is released by the damaged tissues, which causes nearby blood vessels to dilate or open up. As the blood vessels dilate, increased blood flows to the area. If you'd like to watch a YouTube video of this process, you can click the link right there. It's a bit higher level than we need for our class, so there are a lot of terms and types of molecules mentioned that I'm not going to get into right now. So feel free to watch it so you can see what's happening, but don't worry about all that extra vocab. If we look at this picture, this is a sequence of events in the second line of defense. First, the skin is injured somehow. This could be a minor injury like stubbing your toe, slamming your finger, getting a splinter, or poking yourself with a thumbtack, minor cuts and scrapes. Here we have the pin, like the thumbtack push pin, has come in and it's brought in bacteria, because remember, bacteria is all over everything. But remember, we have defenses against it, so every cut doesn't turn into a severe bacterial infection. Here's how that works. As the pin comes in with the bacteria, chemical signals, those were the histamines, get released into the tissue. Those send a message to white blood cells that are floating through in the capillary, small blood vessel, underneath. That causes the blood vessel to get leaky, which releases fluids, that's the actual swelling, and then white blood cells called phagocytes are able to squeeze between the leaky cells of the blood vessel into the damaged area. If you remember from phagocytosis, which I'll demonstrate on the next few slides, phagocytosis is when the white blood cells called phagocytes come to the area, engulf and destroy the pathogens, break them down, and then you can heal. Histamines are hormones or body chemicals that attract white blood cells to the area of injury. The white blood cells leak out of the blood vessels into the damaged tissue to fight the pathogens that have entered. Histamines cause swelling, and we have medications called antihistamines, such as Claritin or Zyrtec, any allergy medication you can think of, Benadryl, Sudafed, things you take when you have a cold. Antihistamines are designed to stop the inflammatory response so that we can feel better. It doesn't mean that our body's not going to continue to heal us, but it just means that we can calm down the swelling so that we can breathe through our nose or not have hives and feel itchy anymore. Pretty cool invention. Phagocytosis. This is a GIF on your slide that shows something like this. We have a white blood cell that comes along, engulfs and destroys the pathogen. That little black thing is supposed to be the pathogen. This process is called phagocytosis. Phage is Greek for eating. Cyte is Greek for cell. So these are white blood cells that are designed to eat other cells. Phagocytes use the process called phagocytosis to engulf and destroy minor pathogens like bacteria. After, quote, eating them, they release the waste into the surrounding environment. Let's summarize the inflammatory response. First, an injury occurs and bacteria enters. Second, histamines are released and white blood cells are attracted to the area. Third, the blood vessel dilates and gets leaky. Fourth, fluid is released to cause swelling. We haven't mentioned this yet in this video, but swelling is also designed to protect the area of injury so that you either don't hurt it again or to pad it so that the internal organs don't get damaged further. So while it might be frustrating to have a swollen finger after you've slammed it in a door, it's painful and swollen so that you know to protect that area and not let it get injured again. 5. Phagocytes engulf and destroy the pathogen and then release the waste into the system. And 6, the swelling goes down and the injury can begin to heal. Fevers. When the body begins its fight against pathogens, body temperature may increase above normal temperature, which is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. Higher temperatures are harmful to many bacterial pathogens. In fact, that's one reason that we cook our food, to get rid of any harmful pathogens on the surface of the food. So, fever can help the body fight infection. However, fever can also be dangerous for our cells. Why would a high temperature be bad? If our cells function best at 98.6 degrees and the fever warms us up to try to cook out or kill the bacteria in our system that shouldn't be there, it's also bad for our cells, which also can't handle high temperatures. So a fever is really our immune system's way of trying to solve a problem, but not very helpful. This is another review of the types of pathogens. You might have different answers based on the class that we did this in, but I will go through these examples for you. The first was done for you. A fungus is eukaryotic, meaning it's multicellular or complex. A common disease associated with fungal infections is athlete's foot. Next, bacteria, which are prokaryotic or simple single-celled organisms. Common diseases associated with bacteria are Salmonella, Strep, E. coli, tetanus. Next, we have viruses, which don't have any cells and are considered non-living. This is things like flus, cold, COVID. Last, we have parasites, which are eukaryotic, meaning they are single or multicellular, but they have a complex internal structure with organelles. These are things like tapeworm, heartworm, pinworm, and malaria. This slide is a vocab review, so if you need help with any of these, let me know. But we wrote down that inflammation is swelling. Cilia are hair-like structures that can trap and sweep pathogens. Histamines are hormones that communicate when tissues are damaged. A pathogen is something that makes you sick, like bacteria, virus, parasites, and fungus. A capillary is a tiny blood vessel where white blood cells can travel to the site of injury. Red blood cells also travel through there. Phagocytosis is the process of when a white blood cell engulfs and destroys pathogens, and the white blood cell that does that is called a phagocyte. So we wrote that phagocytes are white blood cells that will engulf and destroy the pathogen. It's a bit cut off there, but it's very similar to phagocytosis. If a pathogen has broken past the first line of defense, all of the barriers, it was too powerful for the second line of defense, phagocytosis and the inflammatory response. Now we have our third line of defense, which is called the immune response. The first two lines were not specific. They would try to target anything that came in, but they're also not as powerful as the third line. The third line of defense is the specific immune response in which specialized white blood cells target a particular invader. We have many different types of white blood cells that all perform different tasks, which makes them very good at their jobs. How do we identify invaders? Pathogens, things that make you sick, have proteins or marker flags on their surfaces that help the body identify them as foreign. These flags are called antigens. Every organism has a different shape of antigen. Your body has different antigens from your parents, which have different antigens from a dog, which have different antigens from bacteria. Every species has its own type, and every single organism within the species has its own type. These allow our bodies to recognize substances as, quote, non-self, because they're different from our own proteins. This is kind of like the jersey on another team. You can tell who's on your team and who the opponent is based on the shirt they're wearing. This is the pathogen's shirt. These antigens identify the cell as foreign and start an immune response. The shape of the antigen allows the immune system to be specific to certain antibodies. You can see in this image that the antibody on the left is going to go with what's called epitope A. So this is the antibody, the Y-shaped thing. This would be the antigen found on the surface of some specific pathogen. That antibody will not fit with B or C. It has to be designed specifically to fit to the antigen of what it's trying to destroy. We watched this YouTube video in class. It shows the process from start to finish. I will include it in this video later. When an antibody combines with an antigen, the result is an antigen-antibody complex. Think of an analogy to help you remember this. In class, we talked about how puzzle pieces have to fit together to work: a pen and a cap, the door and the frame, a lock and a key, a bottle and the specific cap that's designed for it. We also drew our own antigen-antibody complex, and as long as you drew two things that have to fit together to work, you are correct. So if this is what the antigen looks like, the antibody must have a spot designed to fit that. Antibodies are typically Y-shaped, which is why we keep drawing them like this, but the part where they're going to meet is the part where the shape has to match. Once the antibodies have attached to the pathogen, a type of white blood cell called a macrophage will come and engulf and destroy the complex. The whole complex, including the antibodies that are attached to the pathogen that has been deactivated. This GIF will play on your slides, and it shows a pathogen coming around, eating the little yellow things like a Pac-Man, and then the macrophage comes and engulfs and destroys or eats up the whole pathogen that's been deactivated by antibodies. The prefix macro means big. We learned before that the Greek root phage is eater, so a macrophage is a cell that's a big eater. The white blood cells that distinguish between the different kinds of pathogens are called lymphocytes. Your body has two different kinds. You have T cells that are designed to tag or recognize the antigens on the pathogen by sending a chemical signal. T cells are kind of like your body's alert system that an invader has entered. So the T cell says, alert, alert, there is an invasion of a pathogen. T cells signal to the other cells to launch the rest of the immune response. B cells are the next step. B cells produce antibodies and send them to go attach to the antigens and deactivate the pathogen. I like to think that T is for tag and B is for body, as in antibody. Once we have tagged the pathogen and then sent the antibodies to go deactivate them, we now have to remove any cells that were attacked that used to be doing our cellular jobs and now have been taken over by the virus. Cytotoxic T cells, also called killer Ts or natural killers, are white blood cells that are designed to destroy your body cells that have been infected by pathogens and now would be multiplying to help the virus spread. So we have to kill them off. They can no longer be useful to us. Lastly, we have something called memory cells, or M cells. These are white blood cells that remember the pathogen for future invasions. This helps you launch a quick response to something you've had before, and now you're immune. They do this by recognizing the type of antigen and then being able to produce antibodies and launch the attack quickly in the future. Okay, so here we are in a capillary or some sort of blood vessel, and flying past all those little red things are red blood cells. White things are white blood cells. Now this is a pathogen, and those are the antigens. That's some sort of your tissue, and the pathogen has now connected with your tissue. More of them are coming. Here they come. It's an invasion. You're getting sick. But wait, what are those Y-shaped things? The antibodies come along and plug up the openings on the pathogen. So look, it cannot connect to your tissues now. Here comes a macrophage. Eats it up and sends it on its way. Ta-da! In class, we sequenced the steps of the third line of defense together. First, a pathogen has to break past the first two lines of defense. So it's gotten past the barriers and it's gotten past the phagocytes. It enters the third line, or the adaptive response. Then T cells recognize the pathogen to alert the other cells. They recognize the non-self based on the shape of the antigen. B cells can make antibodies specific to that antigen. Remember, they must fit together to work. Macrophages come along and engulf and destroy the deactivated pathogen. Cytotoxic T cells, or natural killers, that come to destroy infected body cells. And lastly, memory cells remember the pathogen, and you're immune. We filled this Venn diagram out together in class, but I'll put a few things in here. So the immune response is the third line of defense. This is all those different types of white blood cells. So our tagger Ts, sometimes called our helper Ts. We also have our B cells that produce antibodies, our natural killers or cytotoxic T cells, macrophages, and memory cells. Antibodies need specifically to fit to work. And this is a specific response. You can have more than I have, and if you have any questions, let me know. On the inflammatory response side, this is our second line of defense. So this is our phagocytes, histamines. This is a non-specific response, and swelling. In the middle, these are both ways we can defend against pathogens. And they are parts of our immune system, and they keep us healthy. All right. Reach out to us if you have any questions or if you missed anything on the slides. If you're looking for the rest of the next lesson, that will be in a video called Unit 3, Part 2, Types of Immunity.